The moment froze like a paused movie frame. Debbie stood in her kitchen, one hand gripping her phone, the other resting on the counter, when she saw her mother standing in the doorway. Not knocking, not calling out. Just standing there, eyes wide, lips parted, keys dangling loosely from her fingers. For half a second, neither of them moved. The air felt tight, like it might snap if anyone breathed too hard. Debbie was 24 years old. She lived alone in a small apartment she paid for herself. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms, uneven floors, and a window that let in afternoon light, but it was hers. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Her mother's face flashed with something unfamiliar in that doorway. Fear. Not guilt, fear. And in that instant, Debbie realized this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern that had been quietly unfolding for months. It had started subtly. So subtly that Debbie had brushed it off at first. The smell of food lingering in the air when she came home late, even though she hadn't cooked. Her laptop angled slightly differently on the desk, like someone had nudged it while dusting. Laundry folded with a precision Debbie never used. Shirts stacked by color instead of shoved into drawers. Little things. Easy to ignore. Easier to doubt yourself over. When she asked her mother about it, the answer was always the same, delivered with a laugh that felt rehearsed. I'm your mother. Worry. I'm just helping. Helping. That word echoed louder every time Debbie noticed something else out of place. The trash emptied. The fridge reorganized. Mail stacked neatly instead of scattered where Debbie had left it. Each discovery came with a familiar sinking feeling, the sense that her space was no longer fully hers, that her independence was being quietly overwritten. The worst part wasn't the invasion. It was the dismissal. Any hint of discomfort was waved away like a childish overreaction. Her mother spoke the language of love, but it felt more like control wrapped in concern. And then Debbie remembered her childhood diary. She'd been 12 when she discovered it missing from under her mattress. Weeks later, her mother casually referenced something written inside. Something private, something Debbie had never said out loud. Back then, her mother had smiled and said, "I'm just trying to understand you." Debbie learned her first lesson that day. Privacy was optional when love decided it knew better. Standing in her kitchen now, years later, the pieces finally snapped together. Her mother hadn't just worried from afar. She had followed Debbie into adulthood, with a spare key in her pocket. That realization burned hotter than anger. It was betrayal mixed with exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing you've been doubting yourself instead of trusting your instincts. This wasn't about help. This was about access. About refusing to let go. And as Debbie stared at her frozen mother in the doorway, one thought cut through the shock. If love could become a cage, maybe freedom would require breaking it. Have you ever felt like a parent's love turned into a cage you had to break, even if it meant getting a little revenge to finally breathe? If you relate, stick around till the end and hit subscribe so you don't miss how this story explodes. Wednesday nights were always the worst. Debbie dragged herself up the apartment stairs just after 9, her shoulders aching, head buzzing from a double shift she hadn't planned on taking. All she wanted was a shower and silence. The hallway light flickered like it always did, and she fumbled for her keys, already half asleep on her feet. The first thing she noticed wasn't the smell of food. It was her bedroom door. Half open. Debbie never left it that way. Ever. She closed it out of habit, out of comfort, like drawing a line between the world and the one place that felt fully hers. Her exhaustion vanished in a second, replaced by a slow, creeping tension that crawled up her spine. She pushed the door open. Her bedspread was pulled so tight it looked like a hospital room, corners tucked sharply, pillows aligned with unnatural precision. Debbie stared at it, heart thudding. She hadn't made her bed in weeks. On the dresser, her jewelry dish had been moved an inch to the left, earrings paired neatly instead of tangled. And the box. The small cardboard box she kept at the back of her closet, half hidden behind winter coats, sat open on the floor. Inside were things she never shared. Old letters, printed photos, a few creased notes from people she'd loved and lost in different ways. Debbie knelt, hands shaking as she checked the contents, relief and rage tangling together when she realized nothing was missing. Someone had just looked in the kitchen, A foil-covered casserole sat on the counter, still warm. Taped to the lid was a note in her mother's looping handwriting. "You never eat enough. Love you." Debbie didn't cry. She laughed, once, sharp and humorless. Then she picked up her phone. Her mother answered on the second ring, cheerful as always. "Hi, sweetheart. Why were you in my bedroom?" Debbie's voice sounded steadier than she felt. A pause. "Not surprise. Calculation. I stopped by to drop off food. I noticed the place was a mess. You went through my things." "I looked around," her mother corrected. "I was worried." "Worried about what?" Another pause. Then the truth, delivered casually like it was obvious. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't having random guys over. You know how you can be." Debbie's grip tightened around the phone. Images flashed uninvited. Her high school boyfriend, the one with the motorcycle her mother hated. The lectures. The restrictions. The way her mother had always treated attraction like a threat she needed to neutralize. "I'm an adult," Debbie said. "You don't get to check my dating life. You should be thanking me, not accusing me," her mother snapped. "I'm protecting you." Debbie swallowed. "I'm changing the locks." Silence fell heavy on the line before her mother laughed. "With what money? Don't forget who co-signed that lease. You start shutting me out, and maybe I stop helping altogether." There it was. Love sharpened into leverage. Debbie felt something inside her finally crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. Like a rope snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. "For the first time," Debbie said quietly. "I'm serious." Her mother started talking again, faster now, louder. But Debbie didn't listen. She ended the call. It was the first time in her life she'd hung up on her mother. Her hands trembled after, but beneath the fear was something new. Resolve. And a dangerous clarity. And for the first time, I decided that if she wouldn't respect my boundaries out of love, then she was going to learn them the hard way. 2 days later, Debbie saw her mother's car before she ever reached the door. It was parked crookedly in her usual spot, the front tire slightly over the faded white line. Debbie stopped short, grocery bag digging into her palm. Her chest tightened. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but the building was quiet, too quiet for comfort. When she unlocked the door, the sound of laughter hit her first. Her living room lights were on. Shoes, 2 pairs, were kicked off by the couch. Her fridge stood open, the hum of cold air spilling into the apartment like it had every right to be there. On the couch sat her mother, relaxed, scrolling through her phone. And beside her, perched stiffly with a mug in both hands, was her younger sister, Grace. "Debbie," her mother said brightly. "You're home early." Grace smiled, unsure, like she'd just realized she'd walked into the wrong room of a house party. "We brought groceries," her mother continued, gesturing toward the kitchen. "I thought I'd cook dinner. We never get family time anymore." Debbie's gaze flicked to the bags on the counter. Fresh produce. Ingredients for a meal she hadn't asked for. A plan she hadn't agreed to. "Why are you here?" Debbie asked. Her mother's expression shifted instantly. Concerned, practiced. "We were worried about you. You've been so distant. You're falling apart, Deb. I can't just sit back and watch that happen." Debbie laughed softly. "I'm falling apart because I asked you not to let yourself into my apartment." "You're being dramatic," her mother said, the word landing like a verdict. "I brought Grace because I thought seeing family might calm you down." Debbie turned to her sister. "Did you know about this?" Grace hesitated. Her eyes darted to their mother, then back to Debbie. "She said you knew," she admitted quietly. "Of course she did." "You're using her," Debbie said, her voice rising now. "You brought her as backup. As a prop." Her mother's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous." But Grace shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Maybe," she said slowly, "maybe you should have told her we were coming." The room went still. For a brief second, Debbie saw something flicker across her mother's face. Surprise, then anger. She stood abruptly. "Fine. If you want to push away the people who care about you, that's on you." "I'm not pushing you away," Debbie said. "I'm asking you to leave." Now, her mother stared at her, eyes cold. Grace stood too, murmuring an apology as she slipped on her shoes as they reached the door. Her mother leaned in close, her voice low and sharp enough to cut. "Don't expect me to be there when everything falls apart." The door closed behind them, the lock clicking into place with a finality that made Debbie's hands shake. But she didn't chase them, because if love was her excuse to keep breaking in, then Debbie's revenge was going to be teaching her what it felt like to be shut out. Debbie didn't sleep much that night. By morning, the decision had settled in her chest with a strange calm. This wasn't about being impulsive anymore. This was about ending something that had been allowed to grow unchecked. She stood in her kitchen, staring at the door, and finally did what she'd been threatening for weeks. She called a locksmith. The man arrived mid-morning, efficient and polite, replacing the lock in under 20 minutes. When he handed her the new keys, Debbie felt something loosen in her shoulders. A line had been drawn. A real one. Still, she knew it wasn't enough to be noon. She was sitting across from her friend Ella in a crowded coffee shop, the air thick with espresso and noise. Ella listened without interrupting as Debbie laid everything out. The spare key, the threats, Grace being used as leverage. By the time Debbie finished, Ella's expression had hardened. "So," Ella said slowly, "what if the consequences finally land on her instead of you?" That was the question that shifted everything. They talked it through, voices low, sketching the plan layer by layer. First, the locks were already changed. Second, Debbie would stage the apartment to look like she was spiraling. Half-packed boxes, clothes everywhere, furniture slightly moved, chaos that fit her mother's favorite narrative. Third, Debbie would alert the building manager about unauthorized entry and the spare key situation. The building had cameras in the hallway, policies about access, rules her mother had never imagined applying to her. "This makes it public," Ella said. "She can't rewrite the story if other people are watching." "And I don't look like the bad guy," Debbie added. "I look like someone who asked for help." Ella leaned back, studying her. "What will you say when she realizes it was all on purpose?" Debbie didn't answer right away. Because the truth was simple. She wouldn't have to say anything. That afternoon, Debbie spoke with the building manager, calmly explaining that someone had been entering her apartment without permission. He nodded, serious, assured her it would be handled and that security footage would back her up if needed. By evening, the apartment looked convincingly unhinged. Boxes half-filled. Papers scattered. A suitcase open on the bed. It felt strange, performing a version of herself her mother already believed in. Then Debbie sent the text, "I think I might really need your help." The response came almost instantly. "You know you can always count on me." Debbie stared at the screen, heart pounding. Not with fear this time, but anticipation. If you were in her place, how far would you go to teach a parent like that a lesson they could never pretend to forget? Saturday morning arrived with a knot already twisted tight in Debbie's stomach. She woke before her alarm, heart racing, every sound in the apartment suddenly too loud. For a moment, she considered calling the whole thing off. But then she remembered the half-open bedroom door. The threats. The way love had been used to bulldoze her boundaries. She sat up, took a breath and got to work. The first call was to the building manager. She was careful with her words. She didn't say "my mom." She said an unauthorized person. Someone who had repeatedly entered her apartment without permission using a spare key. The manager listened, nodding, reminding her of the building's trespassing policy and assuring her he would enforce it if the person showed up again. "That's exactly what I need," Debbie said, forcing her voice steady. Then came the staging. She pulled her suitcase out from under the bed and filled it halfway with clothes, leaving the rest messily draped over the edges. Moving boxes appeared in the living room, some labeled kitchen, others bedroom, written in rushed, uneven marker. On her laptop, she opened a fake email and left it glowing on the screen. Subject line bold and unmistakable. Notice of move out. She scattered unopened envelopes across the counter. Fake unpaid bills she'd printed the night before. And then she wrote the note that "I can't live like this anymore. I need space, even if it means leaving everything behind." She placed it where it couldn't be missed. By mid-morning, Ella arrived. She took one look around the apartment and let out a low whistle. "This is intense," she said. "It has to be," Debbie replied. A buzz from her phone made them both jump. "On my way." Traffic is awful. Debbie swallowed and did one last thing that felt almost poetic in its irony. She left the door unlocked. Ella retreated into the bedroom, slipping inside and leaving the door cracked just enough to see the hallway. Debbie stood alone in the living room, heart hammering, listening. Minutes later, she heard the elevator ding down the hall, then the distinct sound of her mother's heels on the carpet. The first sound Debbie heard was the scrape of metal against metal, sharp, frustrated twist. Then another. Her mother stood in the hallway, jiggling the old key in the lock that no longer recognized it. Debbie held her breath as the familiar mutter floated through the door. "What on earth?" Before her mother could try again, a calm male voice cut in. "Ma'am." Debbie peeked through the crack in the door just enough to see the building manager step into view. Her mother straightened instantly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm here to see my daughter," she said. "I have a key." The manager glanced at his clipboard. "There are no authorized additional key holders listed for this unit." Her mother blinked. "I've always had one." "That may have been the case before," he replied evenly. "But as of now, if you attempt to enter without her permission, it's considered trespassing." The word trespassing landed hard. Color crept up her mother's neck, a flush of embarrassment made worse by the fact that this time, someone else was saying no. Someone she couldn't guilt, dismiss, or overpower with maternal authority. The knock that followed was sharp. Debbie opened the door. Her mother stepped inside, eyes immediately scanning the apartment. The suitcase, boxes, the scattered papers. She moved quickly now, panic replacing confidence as she crossed the room and read the laptop screen out loud. "Notice of move out?" Her voice cracked. "What is this?" She picked up the note on the counter, hands shaking as she read. "Are you moving out without telling me?" she demanded. "Is this what this is?" Debbie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm thinking about what it takes for me to have a life you no longer control." The words hung between them. Her mother's gaze snapped back to the room, piecing it together too late. The staged chaos. The manager outside. The locked door that no longer answered to her key. Her eyes narrowed. "You set me up." "Yes," Debbie said. Her heart was pounding, but her voice stayed steady. "Now you know what you've been making me feel for years." Panic. The humiliation. The sense that nothing in my life was really mine. For a moment, her mother looked small. "Suppose." Then the familiar armor slid back into place. "I was trying to help you," she said coldly. "And this is how you repay me." She turned toward the door, fury sharpening every step. "You won't have to worry about me breaking into your life anymore," she snapped. "Because I'm done trying." The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. Silence rushed in behind it. A second later, Ella emerged from the bedroom, eyes wide. "That was brutal," she said softly. Then after a beat. But she needed to hear it. Debbie sank onto the couch, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins. The revenge had landed. Now she had to live with what it changed. The silence that followed wasn't loud. IT didn't buzz with tension or hum with the threat of interruption. It was different, cleaner. Final. That a full week passed with no surprise visits. No casseroles left on the counter. No texts asking if Debbie had eaten, slept, or made better choices. The building manager's warning still stood, and for the first time it actually meant something. The lock stayed untouched. Debbie hadn't realized how much energy she'd spent waiting for the next intrusion until there wasn't one. Grace called on the 7th day. "She's really hurt," Grace said carefully. "Embarrassed mostly. She keeps telling people you pushed her away when she was just trying to help." Debbie closed her eyes. "That's her version." "I know," Grace replied. "That's why I'm calling." Grace hesitated before continuing. Apparently, at book club, someone had asked why their mother had been so distracted lately. When she told the story, minus the spare key, minus the threats, one of the women had gently suggested therapy. Another had nodded in agreement. "And she actually went," Grace said. That surprised Debbie more than anything else. "She told the therapist she feels like she's been left behind," Grace continued. "Like everyone else moved on and she didn't." She said something about realizing that if she doesn't change, surviving you is all she'll be able to do. Not love you. The words sat heavy in Debbie's chest. That night, alone in her apartment, Debbie let herself feel everything at once. The relief, the guilt, the strange sadness of knowing her mother was probably sitting alone, confronting pieces of herself she'd avoided for decades. She liked the quiet. But she also wondered what it cost. I didn't do this to abandon her. I did it to survive her. That truth didn't erase the ache, but it made it bearable. And for the first time, Debbie understood something else too. Boundaries don't just protect you from others. Sometimes, they force the people you love to finally face themselves. A month later, Debbie got a text from a number she didn't recognize. It's Mom. Got a new phone. I was wondering if we could talk. Somewhere neutral. Debbie stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Eventually, she sent back one word. Okay. They met at a park halfway between their neighborhoods, the kind with wide paths and benches spaced just far enough apart to discourage intimacy. Debbie arrived first and chose a bench near the pond. When her mother approached, she didn't hug her. She sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving a careful gap between them. The distance felt intentional. Necessary. Her mother looked different. Not physically exactly, but quieter. Less armored. I've been going to therapy, she said after a moment. Every week. Debbie nodded but didn't speak. My therapist asked me something I couldn't answer, her mother continued. She asked when I stopped seeing you as a person, and started seeing you as something I had to manage. She swallowed. I still don't know when it happened. Only that it did. Debbie watched the water ripple in front of them. I've been acting like the only way I know how to love is to control, her mother said. And when you shut me out, really shut me out, I hated it. I've never felt so helpless. So locked out of someone's life. Debbie turned to her then. That's how I felt every time you walked into my space without asking. Her mother nodded slowly. I know. I didn't before. But I do now. They sat in silence for a few seconds, the sounds of the park filling the space. Birds, footsteps, distant laughter. I need to be clear, Debbie said finally. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it comes with rules. Her mother straightened. Okay. No more keys, Debbie said. Ever. No surprise visits. You call or text first, and if I say no, that's the end of it. No guilt trips. No reminding me of what you've done for me. No means no. Her mother listened without interrupting. And if you mess up, Debbie continued, voice steady, you don't see me. For a while. That's the consequence. Her mother's eyes filled, but she didn't argue. Do I stay on the outside forever? She asked quietly. That depends on you, Debbie replied. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're the price of being close. Her mother nodded again. I don't know if I can change overnight, she admitted. But I want to try. Really try. Debbie studied her face. The uncertainty, the effort, the fear of doing this wrong. She believed her. Not completely. Not blindly. But enough. Enough to give her a chance. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They showed up quietly, over months, in patterns that were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Phone calls before visits. Not announcements, questions. Are you home? Would it be okay if I stopped by? Sometimes Debbie said yes. Sometimes she said no. And for the first time she could remember, both answers were honored. The casseroles stopped appearing uninvited. Instead, And sometimes, Debbie felt the echo of guilt anyway, the reflex she'd spent years being trained into. But there was a new understanding now. One carved out of pain instead of convenience. Her mother lost something real. The comfort of unchecked access. The role of the all-knowing parent who could step in whenever she wanted. She had to learn how to be invited instead of assumed. Debbie lost something too. The innocence of believing that love alone would protect her. She had to accept that her revenge, even justified, left scars on both of them, still. Only Debbie's key worked now. Only invited voices crossed her threshold. That to her was worth itezo. I'll leave you with this: boundaries aren't just rules, they're declarations of who we are and how we expect to be treated. But sometimes enforcing them comes with consequences that feel messy, even brutal. Maybe what I did went too far. Maybe it didn't go far enough. I can't say for sure. Now I want to ask you, if someone you loved kept breaking into your life, ignoring every boundary you set, would you have done what I did? Would you have drawn the line so sharply that they finally had to feel what it meant to cross it? Or would you have let them continue, hoping love alone would change them? And here's the harder question. Once they finally paid the price, would you forgive them? Could you open the door again, cautiously, with new rules in place? Or would you keep it closed forever, protecting yourself at the cost of letting them back in? Life doesn't hand out clear answers. We only get our choices and the courage to enforce them, so I'm curious. If someone you loved kept breaking into your life and ignoring every boundary you set, would you forgive them once they finally paid the price? Or would you keep the door closed forever?